So today we're going to continue in our series based on the book of Romans. We're going to be in chapter 4, our series that we title Jew and Gentile Accept One Another. As we read, as we're going to do today, as we read Romans 4, we need to understand that our context and some of the things that we struggle through and that we fight are very similar to what Paul was struggling through and fighting through and helping the congregation in Rome work their way through. So I'm going to give you something of a list of the issues that we find in Rabbi Google and that we see in the mouth of people from time to time that are going to help us understand what Paul was dealing with. All right? So here we go. If you pronounce the sacred name, you commit a grave offense. If you do not pronounce the sacred name, you commit a great offense, and you know nothing. You are part of a conspiracy that the Jews have to conceal the sacred name. You find that in Rabbi Google. That's where most people learn it from. If you do not pronounce the sacred name, you are part of a conspiracy to conceal. Conspiracy that the Jews started somewhere, sometime, to conceal the name of God. Well, if you use the name Yeshua, you know nothing. You don't know how the Hebrew works. You're a wannabe and a neophyte. You have no knowledge. Well, also, if you buy on the Shabbat, if you go put gas on your car, if you go to the gas station and you buy, a drink, if you go to the restaurant, if you do any kind of business on the Shabbat, even if you are a Gentile, this is a great offense. And you're nothing but a Christian, in a pejorative way. You know nothing. You're not Torah observant. Well, I'm not saying we're to desecrate the Shabbat. I'm commenting on the attitude that's behind, on the motivation that's behind. Because most times it's accompanied not by patience and love and perseverance and unity. It's not accompanied by any of those things. So I'll tell you this. I'd rather buy on the Shabbat and fellowship with people who buy on the Shabbat but are struggling to love, to be patient, to be real, rather than someone who is strict on their Sabbath observance and has no love and has no patience and is judgmental and frankly keeps putting stuff in their system and spewing out things that are not life-giving. And I mean that on both sides. When my oldest boy was 15, he said to me, "Dad, I want to go to a real synagogue." I want to go to a real synagogue. At the time, we were members of Gateway Church. And We worship on Saturday. They conveniently have services on Saturdays. So to me, it's like, yeah, this is great. You know, we can still worship on Shabbat. I was at a place where that was the right place for me and my kids. And someday we can talk about some of the details. But I knew that I was supposed to be there for that time, and I was there for 8 years. And I learned a great deal that is very foundational for our success here at Sukkot. So I know the Lord was in it. But he wanted to go to a real synagogue. And I didn't let him. Of course, he couldn't drive, so he couldn't, go by himself. And but I began to direct him. I said, look at the people at Gateway Church. You see how giving they are? Yeah. Do you see how loving they are? Yep. Do you see how much they love Israel and how much money they give to Israel? Yep. So what do you rather have? Do you want to have Torah without love? Or do you want to have love with a fussy understanding of Torah? Nobody has an ideal situation. If you find an ideal congregation, the moment you get there, it's no longer ideal. Because you are in it. So I helped him, and he saw it in time, and he understands now. So, but we deal with these things. Let me give you another one. If women do not dress like Orthodox women, they are committing a grave offense. We have that. If you say the word church, if you speak well of the church, if you can fellowship in a church and with people from a church, you don't get it yet. You haven't arrived yet. If you use names like Jesus or Christ, you are taking the names of pagan gods into your mouth. And the Lord says that they should not be on your lips. And when I asked them, do you know Greek? Do you know how these names came to be? No, they don't. They just got it from, you guessed it, Rabbi Google, along with the attitude that comes behind it. If you maintain a distinction between Jew and Gentile, then you commit a great offense. Because the Torah is supposed to be one and the same, equal for all. If you make any distinction, it's not right. If you basically do not observe according to our traditions, then you are nothing and you know nothing. It amazes me how people will tell you that they are coming from a Greek mentality in which knowledge is king. And they, without knowing, they think they come into a Hebraic mentality of understanding, but they are so proud of the new knowledge they have. You see the irony there. Greek mentality, all about knowledge, don't want anything to do with it. Now I'm so proud that I know the Talmud and you don't. You just have a different content, but you're still worshiping knowledge. And it is what guides you, and knowledge becomes more important than relationships and more important than submission to authority. That's not the spirit of the Torah. I am willing to talk about Shabbat, dressing, the name. I'm willing to talk about it all. But come to me with love, with humility, and then we can begin to have a conversation. If you do not come with those things, I won't even sit down at the table. I can't have a conversation in which I will be disrespected. And the other party will not even be open. So I think this is similar to what Paul was fighting against. Just imagine for a moment. Imagine the congregation in Galatia. I know we're talking about Romans, but the issues were the same. We just happen to know a little more about how messy it was in that town. In Galatia, in the book of Galatians, he says some really provocative things. He says, like, I wish they would cut themselves off. Do you know what that's about? You understanding why he says that? Well, it's a little harsh, though, because, see, his reference is those who are seeking to circumcise the Gentile believers. I wish they themselves will cut themselves off, if you know what I mean. That as they are undergoing circumcision, I wish their knives will cut the whole thing. Very ironic, very funny, not funny. You see, they didn't have Rabbi Google, but they had these false brethren, as Paul will call them, going behind Paul in all of these congregations and telling the believers, the Gentile new believers, it's not enough. What you have is not enough. You need to observe it in our way. You're nothing and you know nothing until you convert to Judaism and you do it the way we do it. You observe the commandments the way we observe them. That's what we have today. A rejection mentality that it has to be my way. It has to be the way I understand it. It has to be the way my group understands it. And if you don't, we cancel you and we cut you off. I don't respect you. I speak evil of you. And you're nothing. And you know nothing. That's what Paul was dealing with. That's what we deal with. So in order to understand a passage like Romans 4, we need to understand that is what he is correcting so that we can then apply it to our context and begin to correct it also in our midst. Come with me to Romans 4. Romans 4 seeks to expand on what he just finished in chapter 3. So we're actually going to pick it up in 3:27. So Romans 3:27 says, where then is boasting? It is excluded. Why would they be boastful? Why would they be struggling with boasting? What do you think? Well, they're boasting in their observance, in the way that they observe the commandments. They are boasting that righteousness comes by their observance of the commandments, whether it is to pronounce the name or not pronounce the name, whether it is to dress in one way or not to dress in one way, whether it is to fellowship with the church and pronounce the names the way the church pronounces them or not. This kind of boasting is the wrong kind of boasting. He says, where's the boasting? It's supposed to be excluded. How? Why? By what kind of law? By the law of works? Meaning by the works of the law? By how you observe the commandments? Yeah, if you're prideful in the way that you observe the commandments, then you have pride. You boast. You boast in your own flesh. It says, not by a law of faith. See, when you bring in the law of faith, then you have nothing to boast about. Because faith is about receiving. It's about understanding that I need everything that God is offering. And that I can only receive it by believing what He says. 28, it says, for we maintain that a man is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Apart from the works of the law. Let me read to you what we said a few weeks ago regarding the works of the law. The works of the law in the New Covenant Scriptures, it means living according to rabbinic rulings. Living according to rabbinic rulings. If you recall, we talked about this document, this letter among the Dead Sea Scrolls called Some of the Works of the Law. How convenient that the Lord preserved this document, and we have it now, that uses this very same language that Paul uses. It's great, very convenient to help us understand what that phrase meant to them back then. And when we read this letter, which we read it, we probably should read it again next week or so. When we read this letter, we understand that they are talking about how to observe the commandments. So they are writing to another group, and they're telling them, if you want to be part of us, which you should want to, because we are the only ones that are going to go to heaven. We are the ones that are righteous. So you should want to be part of us. And if you decide to, here's how you become part of us. Observe the commandments in this specific way. Those are the works of the law. That's what the works of the law means. Observe the commandments in the specific way that our leaders have ruled that they are to be observed. So the works of the law is living according to rabbinic rules, which the Gentiles need to accept by converting to Judaism. That's what Paul was fighting against. Believing that God only accepts people who live by rabbinic rules. And if you don't, then you're out. So Paul says that accepting rabbinic tradition does not save Jew or Gentile. The works of the law is not obedience to the commandments of the Torah. It is not obedience to the commandments of the Torah. Yeshua said this. By your traditions, you annul the commandments of God. Living according to the works of the law, according to the rulings of the traditions of man, is canceling the commandments of God. No wonder No wonder people who claim to follow the Torah and have no love are really not following the Torah. Because how do you summarize the Torah? You love God and you love people. You have no love for people. That tells me you have no love for God. I don't even need to argue that. If you're prideful, you cancel people and you speak evil of those who have less understanding than you, quote unquote. If you do that, I know you really don't love God. I know you really don't follow the Torah. You may follow the works of the law. You may follow the letter of some commandments. You don't know the heart of the Torah. You don't know, truly, you're not living according to the heart of the Father. That's what they struggle with. That's what we struggle with. That's why this chapter is so important to us. Verse 28, back to verse 28. We maintain that a man is justified by faith apart from the works of the law. Verse 29. Or is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not the God of the Gentiles also? Yes, of the Gentiles also, since indeed God, who will justify the circumcised, meaning the Jews, by faith, and the uncircumcised, the non-Jews, through faith, is one. Meaning this is rooted in the Shema. God is one. If God is one, then he is the God of the Jews and he is the God of the Gentiles. So if he is the God of the Gentiles, why do you need to convert to Judaism? He already is your God. He is the God of the Jews, he is the God of the non-Jews. It's not through converting to Judaism that people are accepted and justified before the Lord. It is not by discovering this new world of Judaism and now attempting to adopt it and living by its standards so that God receives you and accepts you. That's not true righteousness. That's external righteousness. And Yeshua said, your righteousness has to be greater than that of the Pharisees. Wow, how is that even possible? They are so right. Well, are they really? Are they really? Do they love people? Do they really love God? And that's external righteousness. You know, it's what I was trying to show my son. It's true righteousness what we need to look for. Do people actually love people? Are they patient? Are they truly forgiven deeply? Are they giving? The answer is yes. They observe the Torah even if they don't know it. Even if they are fussy about the details of the Torah. They understand the heart of the Torah. And they're attempting to live by it. I much rather fellowship with those people and help them understand the rest of it. So, he concludes chapter 3 in verse 31 by saying, do we then nullify the Torah through faith? You know, if justification is not by the works of the law, are we tossing out the Torah then? Are we nullifying the Torah then? No. The reason is that the works of the law and the law are not the same thing. How some people understand it and observe it is different than what it actually says. But that is very meshed in Judaism. I've told you, right? You may go to New York, find a or even go to Israel, find an Orthodox person, and they will invite you to come and study the Torah, and you're so excited, and you go, and when you go, they open the Talmud. And you say, I thought you told me we were going to study the Torah. And they say, this is the Torah. What are you talking about? Because the Torah and the rabbinic rulings are so closely related, but not in the new covenant. This is what Paul is saying. They're not the same. So, by saying no to the works of the law, you're actually saying yes to the Torah. And that's his point here. Do we nullify the actual Torah through faith? That's impossible. May never be. It's impossible because we're actually establishing the Torah. It is the Torah that teaches faith. That's why he talks about the law of faith, the Torah of faith. The true understanding of Torah is that it leads to faith. Don't believe people who tell you, who write, when you read books that talking about the Torah is, the law is legalistic and it is all about commandments, and they don't understand the Torah. I don't care how many PhDs they have. The Torah is the law of liberty, James says. It is the law of faith, Paul says. It's not a law of commandments. If you think it's a law of commandments, you need to keep studying. You need to keep studying. It is a law of faith. So we get to chapter 4. How is Paul going to demonstrate that justification by faith actually establishes the Torah, not annuls the Torah? It supports the Torah because it comes from the Torah. And so he goes into Romans 4:1, and he says, what then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather, according to the flesh, has found? For if Abraham was justified by works, if Abraham was justified by following the works of the Torah, he has something to boast about. But not before God. We're supposed to boast in God. Boast in our Messiah, who died on the cross and rose from the dead. He conquered death. He conquered Satan on our behalf. That's our boast. We boast on the cross. We boast in God, not in our dress, knowledge of the name or not, perfect Sabbath observance. If you boast in those things, be careful. You're boasting in your own flesh, not in God. So he brings Abraham here. Verse 3, he says, for what does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So this is Paul quoting Genesis 15. So let's go to Genesis 15. I think I'm jumping a little bit here for you, Mario. Genesis 15, verse 6, 15:6, it says, then Abraham, he believed, because God told him, you see all the stars, you see the sand, your children are going to be more numerous than all the stars. And Abraham believed. And then it says that he believed in the Lord, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. The Lord reckoned faith to Abraham as righteousness. This word reckon, it's a funny word. It's an old word. You know, you hear, if you like old Western, you know, with John Wayne, when John Wayne looks like he was 30 years old, 25 years old, you know, if you like those old Western, you hear the word reckon a lot. I reckon you're... It's funny to hear them talk that way, right? We don't use that word a lot today. You know, both the Greek word and the Hebrew word, they mean the same thing. It means to consider, to think. So God considered Abraham's faith as if it was righteousness, as if it was the whole package. You probably heard it, as if he had never sinned. That's not even enough. It's not about being neutral. It's about having so much righteousness. It's the righteousness of the Son of God, even before he came. So God is crediting. That's another understanding, another meaning of this word, to credit. To put it into your account as if it was your money, when in reality it wasn't. You didn't work for it. It was credited to you. You are considered as if you had this money, as if you earned it. The Greek word, we find it in Luke 22:37. And we've talked about this passage before, so we'll just stop here real quick. Luke 22:37, it says, "For I tell you," Yeshua speaking, "that this which is written must be fulfilled in me." And he was numbered with transgressors. He's quoting Isaiah 53. And he was numbered with transgressors. Was he a transgressor? Of course not. But this word numbered is that same word used in Genesis 15. The Lord reckoned Abraham's faith as if it was righteousness. Here, Yeshua is being reckoned, is being considered as if he is a transgressor because he was buried among the transgressors. But he really isn't. So in the same way, God considered us as if we are righteous because of the righteousness of his Son that has been given to us. Another one is in Romans 6:11. Romans 6:11. It says, "Even so, consider yourselves to be dead to sin, but alive to God in Messiah Yeshua." Consider yourself. That's the word, consider. To consider, to reckon, to count, to credit. Think of yourself, to think. Think of yourself as if you are dead, when in reality you are not. But spiritually you are. But consider yourself. Reckon yourself. Think of yourself. In Genesis 31:15, we see this word. We see the Hebrew word. Same word that we see in Genesis 15:6. So in 31:15 it says, this is Jacob running away from Laban. Remember the story. He's running away from Laban. He has all the kids, and he has the two wives and the concubines, right? He's got a big party. And the two wives, Rachel and Leah, remember them, they're talking to each other, they say, "Are we not reckoned by him," meaning their father Laban, who is chasing after them, "are we not reckoned by him as foreigners?" He treats us like foreigners. That's what we are to him, even though we're not. It's the same word. To treat someone as if they are something, which in reality they are not, but God has credited righteousness to Abraham and to us by faith. So, come back to Romans 4, verse 4. It says, "Now, to the one who works, his wage is not credited as a favor, right? Imagine your boss comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to give you a gift. And it's your paycheck. You'll be like, no, I earned this, buddy. I worked very hard for this. You're not giving me any gift. The IRS is not going to think this was a gift. They're going to tax me for this as if I earned it. So, his wage is not credited as a favor, but as what is due. 5. But to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. Same that we see in Genesis 15. His faith is credited as righteousness. Just as David, now he brings David as well. All of the Hebrew Bible here. Just as David also speaks of the blessing of the man to whom God credits righteousness apart from works. Same word, credit, to reckon, to think. Credits righteousness apart from works. And then he quotes Psalm 32. Blessed are those whose lawless deeds have been forgiven, and those and whose sins have been covered. Blessed is the man whose sin the Lord will not take into account. Same word. Take into account. Same word. To consider, to reckon. Psalm 32 actually says, how blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven. The word forgiven means to lift. The weight of your transgression, the Lord has lifted it up from you. He's no longer holding you accountable for your transgression. He's forgiven you. He's released you from the weight of it. Whose sin is covered. How blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity. He has iniquity, but the Lord is not imputing it to him. What does imputing mean? Well, you know, amputation, this is the opposite of amputation, right? In amputation, a limb is cut off. Imputed means something that is not yours is given to you. And that something is Yeshua's righteousness. Wow. My sin is cut off from me that rightly belongs to me. And instead, I'm given his righteousness. Infinite righteousness. As if it was me who did all this righteousness. As if it was me who earned all of this millions and millions of dollars by my shrewd business savvy. But it was all given to me because I have nothing. All I have is actually zeros and zeros, and I am actually in debt. That's Psalm 32. How blessed is the man. Amazing. Verse 9, Romans 4:9. Now he begins to apply it. Is this blessing then on the circumcised or on the uncircumcised also? Does the Lord justify only the Jews? Or does he justify the non-Jews? Meaning, does he justify only those who follow rabbinic tradition? Or does he justify those who have no clue about any of that, but have faith? They hear the gospel and they believe. They know nothing about all of these laws and all of these rulings. They know nothing. And they are justified by faith. And then the false brethren come and they tell them, that's not enough. What? Paul says, this is a false gospel. Who is disturbing you? Who has bewitched you, he says. Who played this trick on you to believe that justification is by observing these rulings. When you saw clearly justification is by believing in the Son of God who was presented to you as crucified and risen from the dead. Is this blessing for the Jews only or also for the non-Jews as non-Jews? For we say, he continues, faith was credited to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it credited? While he was circumcised or uncircumcised? What came first? Chapter 15 of Genesis, his faith is credited as righteousness. Or chapter 17 of Genesis, Abraham, you must be circumcised. Clearly, chapter 15 comes first. Justification by faith comes first and is apart from circumcision. Apart from Jewishness and apart from any obedience to the traditions of man. Verse 11. He received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while uncircumcised, so that he might be the father of all who believe without being circumcised, that righteousness might be credited to them. That's a lot right there, but it's simple. Circumcision was a sign that came after. It's a sign that you already are accepted and justified, Abraham. So is the circumcision of the heart. The Torah, in the Torah is where this begins. It is in Deuteronomy where God says, you need to have your heart circumcised. And he picks it up in the new covenant, Jeremiah 31. I will write my Torah in your heart. After you believe. After you believe. It is by faith. Verse 12. He is the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but who also follow in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham. It's not that being circumcised is bad. It's not Jewishness. It's not against faith. But it must be Jewishness and faith. Without trusting in your Jewishness. Without trusting in your obedience. But on faith alone. When we understand this, when Jewish believers understand this, and when non-Jewish believers understand this, they can easily accept one another and fulfill what Romans really is all about. Now we are ready. No one has any loyalty. You know, the apostle said, how can we impose this yoke on the non-Jewish believers? We know, we tried that yoke, we couldn't. They have no loyalty to that yoke, and they're not imposing the yoke on Gentile believers. The problem then is Rabbi Google that comes to talk to the Gentile believers to tell them, no, you need that yoke. No, you don't. So it must be a congregation in which both Gentile believers and Jewish believers understand we have no loyalty to that yoke. Justification is not by following the rulings of men. And when we understand that, we can actually benefit and profit from some level of accepting the traditions of our Jewish people. Because many of them are good and godly. You cannot observe Passover the way we do it without observing a whole lot of Jewish tradition. You may not even know it, but Passover will not be the same at all, will look completely different, because it's all based on an understanding the implications of the text, and it's a lot of heavy traditions that go in it. And the best part is that Yeshua did it. We have the glimpses in the gospel that he followed the Jewish tradition of how to observe Passover. So we are justified in receiving tradition to a certain extent, but without trusting in tradition for justification. Without becoming prideful that I observe this more than you do, that I have more knowledge of these traditions more than you do. This is why I repeat this to you over and over, that this leads us to theological maturity, which leads us to emotional maturity that makes possible our fellowship as mature people who differ, who have differences, real differences of opinion, but who are theologically and emotionally mature to love and respect one another in spite of our differences. When we get to that place, we can support one another in our calling, not minding the small differences, but fulfill the Lord's commission for all of us and advance his kingdom and usher in his coming. Romans is important in far more important ways than we knew or understood. And it is our great privilege to have the Lord open up this book and teach it to us the way that he's doing here at Sukkot. So, when you go home and you go to study, beware. Rabbi Google is out to get you. He's getting people all the way in Israel. Imagine that. Everywhere. Nobody is saved. But we study to become theologically mature. This is when the Jewish people say that studying is a form of worship. This is why. Because when you get up from studying and you speak to your wife and to your children and to your neighbors and to your relatives and families, and you speak to everybody at work, whatever you do, whatever realm where you move, the way that you speak to them, the way you relate to them, the way you respond to them, the way you react to them, all of it will be influenced by the time that you spent bathing yourself in the Word and in prayer, so that you come out of there ready to be filled with the Spirit and be led of the Lord and fulfill the Torah, the actual Torah of love in every relationship that you have. Isn't that amazing? That's our heart here. That's my heart for you. That's the heart of the elders for us. And that's the Lord's heart for his body, for his bride. And we have this privilege, but also great responsibility for what we know, so that we can walk in the revelation and the knowledge and the understanding that he's given to us. Let me pray for us.